The rain had already soaked through her combat fatigues by the time she crawled up the ridge, mud clinging to her elbows, the sting of wet grit grinding into every scrape on her forearms. Her breathing was slow, controlled, each inhale carefully measured against the pounding of her heart. She had been out here for hours, lying low in the jungle's embrace, the stench of rotting vegetation mixing with the metallic tang of gun oil from the rifle in her hands. The others were behind her, 3 men who thought they had seen everything. Ex-special forces, mercenaries, soldiers of fortune who laughed at the idea of a woman leading this mission. They whispered jokes behind her back, sneered at her modifications to the standard-issue weapon she carried, and smirked when she flipped her rifle to full auto during training. They thought she was a liability, an overconfident rookie who would burn through ammo and put them all at risk. None of them understood the hours she had spent custom-tuning that rifle, the obsessive precision that went into balancing recoil springs, machining the bolt carrier, and trimming every gram of unnecessary weight. She had tested every part of it in secret, fired it until her shoulder was black and blue, until the barrel turned a dull silver from heat, until she could reload blindfolded in under 2 seconds. That rifle wasn't a weapon, it was an extension of her body, a carefully engineered instrument of destruction designed for one purpose: survival. The laughter of her squad echoed in her head, but she shoved it aside. There was no room for pride or ego now. Not with the enemy so close. She flattened herself against the ridge and peered through her scope, scanning the valley below. The village was quiet, deceptively so, the shacks and huts arranged in a loose semicircle around a central bonfire pit that had long since gone cold. A rusted truck sat on its side near a collapsed shed, its windows shattered, bullet holes riddling its frame. At first glance, it looked abandoned. But she knew better. Her intel had been clear: this was an enemy forward staging post, a hidden stronghold for a cartel-backed militia notorious for ambushes and mass killings. They were ghosts in the jungle, hunters who vanished into the undergrowth before anyone could retaliate. The mission was simple: eliminate them before they could regroup and attack civilian convoys, but there was nothing simple about this terrain or the odds stacked against them. She adjusted her scope and spotted movement, a glint of metal near the doorway of a hut, a brief flicker of shadow by a window, a barely visible muzzle poking through a slit in the wall. They were everywhere, patient predators lying in wait. She didn't need to count. She could feel the danger pressing in from all sides, the subtle awareness that she and her squad were the ones being hunted. The squad leader, a broad-shouldered man named Briggs, crouched beside her, whispering a harsh command to hold position. He had been in dozens of missions like this, or so he claimed, but she didn't trust him. He was reckless, overconfident, and worst of all, dismissive. He didn't see her as a fellow soldier, he saw her as a liability, someone he could use as bait if things went south. He smirked when she suggested a flanking approach and barked at her to stay put and let the real soldiers handle this. She bit back her response, not because she agreed, but because she knew arguing would only waste precious time. The squad shifted positions, creeping forward in a loose formation, their rifles raised, their boots sinking silently into the mud. She stayed behind, her instincts screaming at her to wait, to observe. And then she saw it, the faintest ripple of movement in the tree line, like a curtain being pulled back. She focused her scope and spotted the shimmer of camouflage, the barely visible shape of a rifle barrel angled downward, a sniper waiting for them to step into his kill zone. Her heart rate spiked, but her hand stayed steady. She raised her rifle, exhaled slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the stillness, and the sniper dropped like a ragdoll, his camouflage cloak fluttering as he tumbled from his perch. The silence shattered. From every angle, gunfire erupted. Muzzle flashes lit the jungle like fireflies, and the air filled with the deafening roar of automatic rifles. Bullets tore through branches, splinters flying as her squad scrambled for cover. Briggs cursed, firing blindly into the tree line, while another man screamed for backup. She ducked low, crawling behind a fallen log as rounds chewed into the ground around her. She could hear them, the militia fighters, shouting orders in a language she barely understood, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony of death. This wasn't an ambush. This was an execution. They had walked straight into a kill box, surrounded on all sides, with no chance of retreat. The enemy had been waiting for them, tracking their every move. Her squad had laughed at her caution, but now their arrogance was costing them dearly. She tightened her grip on her rifle, the weight of it grounding her, focusing her mind. Panic was death. Hesitation was death. She had trained for this moment, bled for it, and she would not die here. She switched her rifle to full auto and pressed her cheek against the stock, her eyes scanning the tree line for movement. The first burst tore through a cluster of leaves, and she saw a man crumple, his weapon spinning out of his hands. Another figure appeared, firing from the hip, but she had already shifted her aim, cutting him down with a controlled spray. The recoil was a whisper, barely more than a vibration in her shoulder, thanks to the custom recoil system she had painstakingly built. Her finger danced on the trigger, sending precise bursts at every muzzle flash she could spot. The squad was pinned, too scared to move, their shouts drowned out by the storm of gunfire. She wasn't thinking about them. She wasn't thinking about anything except survival. Her breathing slowed, her pulse steadied, and the chaos around her became something she could control. Every shot was a decision, every movement calculated. She was no longer the rookie they had mocked. She was death incarnate, and the jungle was her domain. The first magazine clicked empty, but her hands moved on instinct, slamming a fresh one in before the sound of the bolt locking back had even faded. She slid forward, keeping low, using the rain-soaked terrain as cover. The militia fighters weren't expecting this. They had anticipated fear, retreat, desperation. Instead, they were facing precision, aggression, and an enemy who refused to be hunted. She moved like a shadow, her shots cutting through the chaos with surgical accuracy. Each target dropped where they stood, their comrades scrambling in confusion, shouting orders that dissolved into panic. The jungle echoed with gunfire and screams, the metallic scent of blood mixing with the damp earth. She was dimly aware of Briggs shouting her name, telling her to fall back, but she ignored him. Retreat was death. The only way out was through. A burst of gunfire grazed the log she was using as cover, sending bark and splinters into her face. She rolled to the side, returning fire with a burst that silenced the shooter. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, sharpening her senses to a razor's edge. Every sound was amplified, the rustle of leaves as someone tried to flank her, the metallic click of a rifle being reloaded, the ragged breathing of a man crouched behind a tree just a few meters away. She fired through the trunk, the high-velocity rounds punching clean holes through the wood, and his scream confirmed the kill. She didn't stop to think, didn't stop to count. There was no time. The world had narrowed to her rifle's sights, the rhythm of her breathing, and the bodies dropping one by one. Her squad was still pinned down, but she could hear the change in the enemy's gunfire. The initial confidence had evaporated, replaced by frantic bursts and erratic movement. She was cutting through their numbers faster than they could regroup, her rifle roaring in steady bursts, the sound echoing through the jungle like thunder. She swapped mags again, her hands moving with mechanical precision, every motion practiced to perfection. Her shoulders ached, her ears rang, but she didn't care. She had trained for this moment, lived for it. All those hours on the range, the ridicule, the dismissive smirks, it all led to this. She was proving them wrong with every pull of the trigger. And then there was silence. Not the eerie stillness of before, but the heavy, suffocating quiet that follows death. Smoke hung in the air, mixing with the misty rain, and the stench of blood was overpowering. She rose slowly from behind her cover, her rifle still raised, scanning for movement. The ground around her was littered with bodies, dozens of them, sprawled in unnatural positions, their weapons scattered like discarded toys. 50 men, maybe more, cut down in a matter of minutes. Her squad emerged from their positions, wide-eyed and silent, staring at the carnage. Briggs' mouth hung open, his earlier arrogance replaced by something else entirely, fear. They had mocked her for using full auto, for relying on a weapon they thought was uncontrollable. But now they had seen it, seen her, turn the tide of battle with a single magazine and unrelenting precision. She didn't say a word. There was nothing to say. The jungle had swallowed their laughter and spat it back as silence. She wiped the rain and sweat from her face, her hands trembling only slightly as she checked her ammo. 3 full magazines left, 1 partial, and a sidearm strapped to her thigh. The enemy bodies sprawled in grotesque heaps around the clearing were a grim reminder that this fight was far from over. This was just one outpost, and their gunfire would have echoed through the jungle like a beacon. Reinforcements would already be moving. She glanced back at her squad, their faces pale and shaken, none of them daring to meet her eyes. Briggs finally found his voice, his bravado replaced with something that almost sounded like respect. "How the hell did you do that?" he muttered, his tone hoarse. She didn't answer, only signaled for them to regroup and reload. Talking was a waste of breath now. They needed to move, to vanish before the next wave closed in. The jungle was alive with distant echoes, branches snapping, boots squelching through the mud. She crouched low, motioning for silence, and led them into the undergrowth, her senses stretched to their limits, every sound and shadow scrutinized for threats. The rain intensified, a steady sheet that blurred vision and muffled sound, but it did little to mask their trail. She could feel the tension radiating from her squad, the weight of fear pressing down as they followed her lead. They had underestimated her once, they wouldn't make that mistake again. They moved quickly, weaving through dense foliage and towering trees, the jungle canopy so thick it felt like twilight even in daylight. She stopped abruptly, raising a clenched fist, and dropped to one knee. Ahead, a narrow footpath wound through the undergrowth, barely visible but clearly traveled. She scanned it through her scope, spotting faint tracks, fresh ones, the mud still soft from recent movement. Enemy patrol. She signaled for her squad to fan out and take cover, her mind working through possible approaches. Ambush was risky, they were low on ammo and couldn't afford a prolonged firefight. She crept forward, her boots sinking silently into the muck, her body low to the ground as she advanced on the path. The first soldier appeared moments later, a shadow slipping through the mist, his rifle at the ready. He wasn't alone, two more followed closely, their eyes scanning the tree line but missing her entirely as she melted into the foliage. She exhaled, lined up her shot, and took the lead soldier with a suppressed burst. The second went down before he could react, and the third turned just in time to see death in her eyes before a bullet punched through his chest. The jungle swallowed the sound, leaving only the hiss of rain. She motioned for her team to drag the bodies into the brush, their weapons and ammo stripped and redistributed. Every bullet counted now. They pushed deeper into the jungle, moving in silence, each step deliberate. She could feel the enemy tightening their net, the distant rustle of movement growing louder, closer. This wasn't random searching, they were being tracked by professionals. She scanned the ground, spotting faint boot prints and subtle signs of passage that told her they were being funneled, herded toward a choke point. She stopped abruptly, holding up a fist. Briggs, breathless and soaked, crouched beside her. "What now?" he whispered. She pointed to the trail ahead, where the ground dipped slightly, the brush unusually sparse. A kill zone. She had seen enough ambushes to recognize the setup. If they moved forward, they'd be cut down in seconds. She motioned for a retreat, leading them into a thicket off the trail, their bodies crawling through slick mud and tangled vines. It was slow going, but it kept them alive. They circled wide, using the terrain to mask their movement, and eventually found themselves overlooking the very spot where they would have been slaughtered. At least 20 militia fighters crouched in perfect cover, rifles aimed at the trail, waiting for prey that would never come. She studied them through her scope, her finger hovering over the trigger, but firing now would only give away their position. Instead, she memorized their layout, counting heads, marking exits, and calculating their next move. The squad's morale was fraying, the tension palpable. One of the men, a wiry sharpshooter named Keller, muttered under his breath about their dwindling ammo. Briggs hissed at him to shut up, but she could feel the doubt creeping in. She ignored them, focusing on their surroundings, every sense attuned to danger. She spotted a narrow ravine cutting through the jungle to their left, partially hidden by thick undergrowth. It was risky, but it offered cover and a route to flank the ambushes. She signaled for silence and moved toward it, crawling on her stomach, her rifle cradled close to her body. The ground was slick and treacherous, the rain turning every step into a potential slip, but she moved with practiced precision, every muscle honed for this kind of terrain. The ravine dropped sharply, forcing them to slide down on their bellies, their uniforms soaked and smeared with mud. At the bottom, the air was cooler, the sound of rain muted by the towering walls. It was claustrophobic, but it kept them hidden. She led them through it, every few steps stopping to listen, scanning for movement. They emerged behind a ridge overlooking the ambush site, the militia fighters completely unaware of their presence. She positioned her team, signaling Keller to take the far left flank while Briggs covered the center. She took the right, adjusting her rifle, her breathing steadying as she lined up her first shot. She squeezed the trigger, and the chaos began. Her squad opened fire with brutal efficiency, the element of surprise devastating their enemies. Militia fighters scrambled, returning fire blindly as bullets tore through their ranks. She moved like a phantom, her rifle barking in precise bursts, every shot finding a target. The jungle erupted with gunfire, the echoes bouncing off the trees, but within moments it was over. The militia was gone, their ambush destroyed before it even began. Briggs let out a shaky laugh, more from relief than humor, and muttered something about her being a damn ghost. She ignored him, scanning the tree line for movement. They scavenged what ammo they could from the fallen fighters, each magazine carefully counted, every grenade pocketed. The rain was relentless now, a torrential downpour that made visibility nearly impossible, but it also masked their scent and muffled their movements. She led them away from the kill site, deeper into the heart of enemy territory. They had a mission to complete, eliminate the militia leadership and cripple their operations. There was no turning back, not now. The squad followed her without question, their earlier doubts and mockery replaced with quiet respect. She could feel it in their movements, the way they mirrored her posture, the way they glanced at her for silent commands. She had earned their trust in blood, and that was a currency no one could fake. The jungle grew darker as they pressed forward, the canopy thickening overhead until it felt like they were walking beneath a ceiling of shadow. Every step was a calculated risk, every breath shallow to keep from alerting the predators hunting them. She led with silent precision, her senses sharpened to an almost unnatural degree, hearing the faintest creak of a branch, smelling the acrid trace of gun oil on the wind, feeling the shift of air currents when danger was near. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but that only made every noise more distinct. She stopped suddenly, crouching low, her fist raised to halt the squad. Ahead, barely visible through the mist, was a crude watchtower fashioned from bamboo and steel sheets, standing like a sentinel over a clearing. A lone guard leaned lazily against the railing, smoking a cigarette, his rifle slung carelessly across his chest. His posture suggested boredom, but she knew better. Men like this feigned indifference because they were killers who could snap into action in an instant. She signaled Keller, who took a knee and lined up his shot. The crack of the suppressed rifle was nearly inaudible, but the guard's head snapped back, and he slumped against the railing before tumbling silently into the underbrush. She motioned them forward, and they slipped into the clearing like wraiths, their movements silent, deadly, purposeful. The clearing was littered with crates of ammunition and fuel barrels, a makeshift supply depot for the militia, unguarded except for the man they had just killed. It was tempting to torch the place, to cripple their supplies, but she knew it would draw too much attention. This wasn't about making noise, this was about precision. She marked the location in her mental map and moved them along, their footsteps soft in the mud. They were closing in on the militia's main compound now, deep within the heart of this jungle fortress. Every piece of intel she'd studied burned in her memory, the terrain layouts, patrol patterns, estimated enemy strength. She had spent weeks preparing for this mission, obsessing over every detail, while her squad treated it as just another paycheck. But she knew the stakes. These men they were hunting weren't just mercenaries or rebels. They were executioners, responsible for massacres in nearby villages, leaving behind burned homes and bodies displayed as warnings. The cartel had bankrolled them, but these killers had made cruelty into an art. She'd seen the aftermath of their work, and the images haunted her dreams. This wasn't just a mission, this was justice. Her hand tightened on her rifle as she signaled for the squad to halt. They crouched low in the undergrowth, their eyes following her line of sight. Ahead, partially obscured by foliage, was the outer fence of the compound. It wasn't much, rusted wire strung between wooden posts, but it marked the line between hunter and hunted. Beyond that fence was their target, the man known only as Ruiz, a former military commander turned cartel warlord. She studied the fence and spotted a gap where the wire sagged near a tree. It was a weak point, easy to exploit, but getting close without being detected would be another matter. Guards patrolled the perimeter, moving in pairs, their flashlights cutting narrow beams through the mist. She signaled for the squad to stay put and crawled forward alone, her body pressed low to the ground, mud soaking her uniform. She moved inch by inch, every muscle controlled, every breath measured. A guard passed within 5 meters of her, his boots squelching in the mud, the faint smell of sweat and cheap cologne lingering in the air. She froze, waiting until he moved on before inching forward again. When she reached the sagging section of fence, she carefully cut a slit in the wire with her combat knife, just wide enough for them to slip through. She motioned for the squad to follow, their bodies gliding silently over the jungle floor, their weapons ready. They moved through the gap one by one, and in moments, they were inside enemy territory. The compound was a crude arrangement of shacks and makeshift barracks, with a central building that stood out like a fortress among the rest. That was where Ruiz would be. The air was thick with smoke from campfires, and she could hear laughter and conversation from a nearby barracks. The guards were relaxed, confident in their numbers and the remoteness of their location. That confidence would be their undoing. She signaled for Keller to take the high ground, sending him to a tree overlooking the main path. Briggs and the other man, Ortiz, took positions near the barracks, ready to cut down anyone who came running at the first sign of trouble. She moved forward, her rifle tight against her shoulder, her body a shadow in the mist. The first guard never saw her coming. She slipped behind him, her blade flashing once before she dragged his body into the shadows. Another guard appeared around a corner, and her suppressed rifle barked once, dropping him silently. She was a ghost in their midst, striking with ruthless precision, leaving only silence in her wake. The tension in the compound shifted as she moved closer to the main building. The laughter died down, replaced by the faint murmur of radios and boots scuffing against wooden floors. She signaled to Briggs, who nodded grimly. They would breach together, fast and loud, no hesitation. She checked her magazine, adjusted her grip, and took a steadying breath. With a swift kick, she sent the door flying open, her rifle already firing. The first man inside dropped instantly, followed by another who scrambled for his weapon too slowly. Briggs stormed in behind her, his shotgun roaring as he cut down two more. The room exploded with gunfire, chaos erupting as guards spilled out from side rooms, shouting orders in panic. She moved like a machine, her rifle an extension of her body, every shot deliberate and deadly. She ducked behind a table as bullets ripped through the air, splinters stinging her face, then rose and returned fire, dropping 3 men in quick succession. Briggs reloaded with practiced efficiency, his face grim, sweat dripping down his brow despite the cool air. They were outnumbered but not outgunned, and within moments, the firefight subsided, the last of the guards falling with a choked scream. She advanced through the building, stepping over bodies, her senses alert for movement. At the end of a narrow hallway was a reinforced door, its surface scarred by years of abuse. This was it. Ruiz was behind that door. She signaled Briggs to cover her, then reached for a breaching charge strapped to her vest. She placed it carefully, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She pulled Briggs back, signaled a 3-count, and detonated the charge. The explosion was deafening, filling the hallway with smoke and debris. She stormed through the door, her rifle raised, eyes scanning for her target. Ruiz was there, crouched behind a desk, a pistol in his hand, his face twisted in fury and fear. He fired wildly, but she was already moving, her shots precise, tearing through his defenses. He collapsed with a guttural scream, the pistol clattering to the floor. She advanced slowly, her rifle trained on him as he writhed in pain. For a moment, the jungle outside seemed to fall silent, as if holding its breath. The man who had terrorized villages, who had ordered massacres, who had thought himself untouchable, lay broken at her feet. She lowered her rifle slightly, her breathing steady, and the mission's weight settled over her. One objective was complete, but the war was far from over. She stood over Ruiz's lifeless body for only a second, her rifle still trained on him in case he had some last surge of defiance, but his eyes had already gone glassy, the life drained from them. Briggs moved past her, scanning the room, his breath ragged, his shotgun still smoking from the last firefight. "We need to move," he muttered, his voice low but urgent. She nodded once, already sweeping the area for intel. The desk Ruiz had crouched behind was littered with maps, coded documents, and a satellite phone still buzzing faintly from an incoming call that had gone unanswered. She grabbed the phone, stuffed it into her vest, and scooped up the documents, her movements efficient and practiced. Information was more valuable than bodies. Killing Ruiz would disrupt their operations, but the intel she carried could dismantle entire networks if they made it out alive. Briggs had already positioned himself at the door, glancing nervously at the smoke-filled hallway. "They heard that blast," he hissed. "We don't have long before they swarm." She met his eyes briefly, then signaled for him to lead the way. The squad regrouped, Keller and Ortiz slipping into the room with wide eyes, both men drenched in sweat and mud. "We've got movement outside," Keller whispered. "Lots of it. They're converging." She adjusted the sling on her rifle, the familiar weight reassuring her as adrenaline surged. This wasn't over, this was just the beginning of their extraction. They moved quickly, retracing their steps through the building, stepping over bodies, their boots leaving muddy prints on blood-stained floors. She led with her rifle raised, her breathing steady despite the chaos outside. The rain had started again, a torrential downpour that hammered against the metal roof, drowning out distant shouts and making it harder to distinguish movement. She crouched near a window, peering through the cracked glass, and saw flashes of light moving through the compound, headlamps, flashlights, the glint of rifles. Dozens of reinforcements were spreading out, searching for the intruders who had just assassinated their leader. She scanned the terrain, her mind mapping out possible escape routes, discarding options as quickly as she imagined them. They couldn't go back through the fence they'd cut, it would be crawling with guards by now. The jungle beyond the east side of the compound was thick, but it offered the best cover if they could reach it. She signaled east, her hand gestures sharp, and the squad adjusted their formation, slipping into the corridor like shadows. The first firefight erupted near the rear entrance. 2 guards rounded the corner, their rifles already raised, but she was faster, her weapon barking twice, both men dropping before they could fire. The squad sprinted through the hallway, their boots slamming against the wooden planks, and burst out the back door into the pounding rain. Bullets cracked through the air almost immediately, tracer rounds slicing past them as guards opened fire from the barracks. She dove behind a stack of crates, firing controlled bursts to keep their enemies' heads down, while Briggs lobbed a grenade over the barricade. The explosion lit up the night, showering debris across the compound, and screams echoed as shrapnel tore through their attackers. "Move!" she barked, her voice sharp and commanding. They sprinted through the chaos, weaving between burning crates and overturned vehicles, the rain turning everything slick and treacherous. Ortiz slipped but recovered, his rifle spitting fire at a guard who charged from a side alley. Keller was a shadow on the high ground, picking off enemies with ruthless precision, his shots punctuating the chaos like a drumbeat of death. They reached the perimeter fence, ducking low as bullets zipped past, punching holes in the rusted wire. She dropped to a knee, cutting a gap while Briggs and Ortiz provided cover fire. Sparks flew as rounds struck nearby metal, the stench of burning gunpowder filling the air, but her hands were steady, her focus unbreakable. She yanked the last strand free and motioned for them to go. One by one they slipped through, Keller bringing up the rear, his sniper rifle slung across his back. The jungle swallowed them instantly, the darkness and rain providing the cover they desperately needed. But the enemy wasn't far behind. Shouts echoed through the trees, flashlights bobbed in the distance, and the sound of boots pounding against wet earth followed like a drumbeat of pursuit. She led them into the dense undergrowth, weaving through vines and roots, every step deliberate to avoid making unnecessary noise. The jungle was their ally now, a maze of cover and concealment, but it was also unforgiving. One wrong move, one slip, and they'd be caught. Her breathing slowed as she listened, crouched in the underbrush. The enemy had fanned out, their voices growing closer. She could hear the metallic clicks of weapons being readied, the crunch of boots snapping branches, the faint hum of radios. She motioned for silence, her hand signals crisp in the dim light, and they sank lower, becoming part of the jungle itself. The rain masked some of their scent and sound, but not all. These men were trackers, skilled in jungle warfare, and they would comb every inch of this terrain until they found their prey. She scanned the area, her mind racing for a plan. There was no way to outrun them, they had to break the chase. She spotted a narrow gully ahead, barely visible beneath layers of vines and ferns. It was steep and treacherous, but it would give them elevation and the chance to set an ambush. She signaled the route, and they moved silently, slipping through the brush like predators rather than prey. They reached the gully, sliding down the slope on their bellies, mud coating their uniforms. The air was cooler here, the sounds of pursuit muffled by the dense foliage above. She motioned for them to spread out along the ridge, positioning themselves with clear lines of sight over the approach. This was where they'd make their stand. She planted claymores at key choke points, her hands moving quickly, her mind calculating angles and kill zones. Keller adjusted his rifle, scanning for targets, while Briggs and Ortiz checked their remaining ammo. They were low, dangerously low, but she had already proven that ammo didn't win firefights, precision and ruthlessness did. She crouched behind a fallen tree, her rifle steady, her eyes locked on the dark trail they had just come from. The first flashlight beam pierced the mist moments later, followed by the faint outline of a soldier creeping forward. She exhaled slowly, her finger tightening on the trigger. The ambush would be brutal, fast, and final. The enemy moved in cautiously, their formation disciplined, their weapons sweeping the trees. They knew their prey was near, but they didn't know exactly where. She waited, every nerve taut, her breathing slow, her heartbeat steady. When the first soldier stepped into the kill zone, she detonated the claymores. The jungle exploded with fire and shrapnel, screams cutting through the night. She opened fire immediately, her rifle suppressor keeping her position hidden as she dropped enemy after enemy. Keller's shots cracked like thunder, each one finding its mark, while Briggs and Ortiz poured controlled bursts into the chaos. The militia fighters panicked, their disciplined approach crumbling as they scrambled for cover. She moved like a phantom, her shots precise, her body flowing from one position to the next. The gully became a killing ground, every inch of it littered with bodies. She reloaded in a fluid motion, her hands working from muscle memory, and resumed firing without missing a beat. The rain, the mud, the darkness, all of it was on her side, turning the enemy's numerical advantage into a death trap. The gunfire died down slowly, replaced by the sound of rain pattering against leaves and the groans of the wounded scattered among the dead. Smoke from the detonated claymores lingered in the mist, mixing with the acrid stench of gunpowder and blood. She crouched low behind the fallen tree, scanning through her scope for any signs of movement, her senses tuned to every sound, every shadow. Keller signaled all clear from his position up on the ridge, his sharp eyes still sweeping the jungle, and Briggs exhaled heavily as he ejected a spent magazine and slammed a fresh one into his shotgun. Ortiz wiped a streak of mud from his face, his breathing ragged but steady. They were alive, but they weren't safe. The jungle felt alive around them, an oppressive wall of darkness and wet foliage that seemed to close in tighter with every passing moment. She adjusted the sling of her rifle and motioned silently for them to regroup. Keller slid down the ridge, his boots squelching in the mud, and crouched beside her, whispering, "We've got a window. Maybe 5 minutes before more come sniffing." She nodded, already calculating their next move. The militia would not stop hunting them. Ruiz's death would only fuel their determination. She needed to get her team out before reinforcements arrived in overwhelming numbers. They moved quickly but cautiously, their bodies low, every footstep placed with deliberate care. The rain did its best to mask their trail, washing away footprints and scattering their scent, but she wasn't naive enough to think it would stop professional trackers. She led them deeper into the jungle, away from the compound, her mind working through every escape route she'd memorized from the intel. There was an extraction point 4 clicks east, a clearing wide enough for a helicopter, but reaching it meant threading through terrain crawling with hostiles. She crouched near a stream, kneeling in the mud as she dipped her fingers into the cold water, scanning upstream and downstream. Water was their ally, it could mask their tracks, slow their pursuers. She signaled east, leading them into the shallow stream, the icy water soaking their boots instantly. They waded silently, rifles held high, their movements synchronized, no one daring to speak. The jungle canopy above was so thick that it felt like night, the faint glow of the moon barely piercing through the layers of leaves. Every rustle in the undergrowth set her nerves on edge, every splash of water behind her making her glance over her shoulder. The stream wound through the jungle like a serpent, its banks steep in places, providing natural cover. She kept them moving fast but silent, their pace dictated by the constant awareness that the enemy was closing in. The rain intensified again, pounding against their helmets, dripping into their eyes, soaking every layer of clothing. It was miserable, but she welcomed it. The harder the rain fell, the more their enemy's visibility and communication would be compromised. They stopped briefly under the cover of a massive fallen tree, its roots jutting out like skeletal fingers. She crouched beside Keller, scanning a digital map on a small waterproof tablet. The extraction point was still 3 clicks away, and she could already hear faint shouting in the distance, the sound carried unnaturally far in the wet jungle air. "They're sweeping in a pincer," Keller murmured, his voice barely audible. She nodded grimly. Their enemies weren't just throwing numbers at them, they were strategizing, cutting off escape routes. She closed the map and signaled to keep moving. There was no time to rest, no time to second guess. Minutes stretched into hours as they pushed through the jungle, their senses razor-sharp, their bodies aching from the relentless pace. She paused suddenly, dropping to a knee, her rifle raised. Ahead, a faint flicker of light glowed through the mist, torchlight swaying rhythmically. She signaled a halt, and the team froze, melting into the shadows of the thick foliage. Slowly, she crawled forward, her belly pressed against the wet earth, her scope trained on the movement ahead. A patrol of 6 men, their rifles slung lazily, walked single file along a narrow jungle path. They were laughing quietly, unaware of the hunters stalking them. She gestured to Keller, who adjusted his sniper rifle silently, his breathing slowing. With 3 muffled shots, 3 men fell before the others even realized what was happening. She darted forward, her rifle firing in controlled bursts, cutting down the remaining guards in seconds. The patrol collapsed in silence, their bodies crumpled in the mud. Briggs and Ortiz moved quickly to strip them of ammunition and grenades, redistributing the gear with practiced efficiency. Every bullet was precious now, they couldn't afford to waste a single shot. They dragged the bodies off the path, covering them with brush to delay discovery, and pushed onward. The extraction point was closer now, less than 2 clicks away, but she could feel the tension in the air thickening. The jungle wasn't just alive, it was watching. Somewhere out there, enemy scouts were moving, waiting, tracking. She motioned for the squad to spread out, increasing their spacing to avoid being wiped out in a single ambush. Her instincts screamed that danger was near, and her instincts had kept them alive this long. They moved like ghosts, their uniforms blending into the wet foliage, their weapons steady, every muscle coiled like a spring. Suddenly, a faint metallic click echoed through the night, a sound every soldier recognizes instantly. She froze, her eyes scanning the ground ahead. "Mines." She signaled a halt, raising her fist sharply. Ortiz crouched beside her, his face pale as he spotted the barely visible glint of a tripwire strung between 2 roots. The militia had mined the area, anticipating their escape route. She motioned for them to hold position as she crawled forward carefully, inspecting the device. A simple but deadly booby trap, pressure-sensitive with a secondary tripwire. Disarming it would take time they didn't have. She backed away slowly and signaled for a detour. They veered off the path, moving through thicker vegetation, their progress slower but safer. The sound of enemy voices was growing louder now, the hunters closing in from multiple angles. She tightened her grip on her rifle, scanning constantly, her nerves stretched taut. They emerged into a small clearing dotted with boulders and thick tree trunks. It was a natural choke point, and she realized instantly that they were walking into another ambush. Before she could signal a retreat, gunfire erupted from both sides, tracer rounds slicing through the darkness. She dove behind a tree, firing back in short, precise bursts, her team scrambling for cover. Keller dropped 2 enemies from his vantage point on a boulder, while Briggs laid down suppressive fire with his shotgun, forcing the attackers to take cover. Ortiz tossed a grenade into the brush, the explosion lighting up the clearing and buying them a few seconds of breathing room. She moved like lightning, sprinting between cover, her rifle spitting controlled fire, each shot lethal. The enemy pressed hard, but she and her team were a wall of precision and aggression, refusing to break. The firefight raged for minutes that felt like hours, the jungle lit by muzzle flashes, the air thick with smoke and rain. She ducked as a round zipped past her head, slammed a fresh magazine into her rifle, and took down 2 enemies trying to flank. Keller's shots rang out like a metronome, each one followed by a body dropping. Briggs roared as he fired, his shotgun devastating at close range, while Ortiz moved like a shadow, flanking their attackers and cutting them down with ruthless efficiency. The militia fighters weren't expecting this level of resistance, and their assault faltered. She seized the moment, signaling a push. They surged forward, their firepower overwhelming, and within moments, the clearing was silent except for the rain and their ragged breathing. Bodies lay scattered among the trees, rifles abandoned in the mud. She scanned the perimeter through her scope, searching for movement, but the enemy had retreated. They had survived another ambush, but the cost was clear on her team's faces: exhaustion, tension, and the grim knowledge that this wasn't over. The rain didn't let up, turning the jungle floor into a swamp of sucking mud and slick roots that threatened to take them down with every hurried step. She pushed forward anyway, heart pounding, every sense alert as they advanced deeper into hostile territory with no time to waste. The extraction point was close now, less than a click away, but every instinct screamed that they weren't out of danger. She glanced back at Keller, who was limping slightly but waved her off when she tried to slow down. Briggs, breathing heavily, reloaded his shotgun and muttered something under his breath that was swallowed by the storm. Ortiz was bringing up the rear, his rifle sweeping constantly as he scanned for movement. The group moved like predators, their exhaustion buried beneath sheer willpower, every step measured but relentless. The jungle around them was eerily quiet aside from the rain, and that silence felt wrong. It was the kind of silence that came before a storm, before bullets cut through the air. She motioned for them to stop and crouched low, her eyes darting between the trees. There was movement ahead, faint and fleeting, the shimmer of light bouncing off wet leaves where there shouldn't be any. She raised her fist, signaling them to hold position, then gestured for Keller to take a vantage point. Without hesitation, he slid behind a fallen log and scoped in, his sniper rifle steady even as water streamed off the barrel. She crawled forward, her rifle cradled tightly, and peered through the underbrush. A dozen enemy fighters were spread across a small ridge that overlooked the path leading to the clearing where their extraction was set. They were dug in with sandbags and mounted machine guns, the barrels gleaming in the dim moonlight. This wasn't just a patrol, this was a kill zone, meticulously prepared to wipe out anyone attempting to escape. She bit back a curse and slid back to the team, signaling them to regroup. "They know," Keller whispered when she reached him, his voice low but steady. She nodded grimly. The militia wasn't just chasing them blindly, they had predicted their escape route and fortified it. The only way out was through, and a head-on assault would be suicide. She crouched with the team beneath the thick canopy, quickly sketching a plan in the mud with her finger. They'd need to flank hard, hit the ridge from 2 sides, and take out the heavy guns before they could mow down her squad. Keller would provide overwatch while Ortiz set charges to disrupt the enemy's line. Briggs' shotgun wasn't ideal for range, but his fearlessness and raw firepower made him perfect for leading the assault with her. They moved without hesitation, splitting silently into 2 groups. Keller slithered into position, finding a nest on higher ground where he could see the entire ridge. Ortiz disappeared into the jungle, his movements ghost-like, carrying explosives carefully packed in his rucksack. She and Briggs circled wide, their boots sinking into mud as they crawled up the far side of the hill. The rain masked their sound, but every step felt like an eternity, every snap of a twig a potential alarm. Through the foliage, she could see the enemy clearly now. They were alert but not expecting a coordinated attack. Their posture was casual, their rifles held loosely. The machine guns were positioned to cover the path below, not their flanks. She took a slow breath, letting her heart beat steady. Then Keller's first shot cracked through the jungle, dropping a guard instantly. Chaos erupted. Before the others could react, she and Briggs opened fire, their rifles cutting down 2 more. The militia scrambled for cover, their shouts drowned out by the storm, but it was too late. Ortiz's charges detonated with a thunderous roar, sending one of the mounted guns flying into the air and reducing their cover to splinters. The ridge was a killing field now, and her team was the executioner. She moved with lethal precision, her rifle spitting controlled bursts, each shot deliberate and final. Briggs surged forward like a battering ram, his shotgun booming in rapid succession, shredding the enemy's defenses. Keller's shots were surgical, each one dropping a man who dared to poke his head out. Ortiz appeared from the shadows, his rifle blazing as he swept through their flank, his explosives having shattered their morale. In less than a minute, the ridge was silent except for the rain and the hiss of burning debris. They didn't celebrate. There was no time. She motioned them to sweep the area, making sure no one was left alive to radio in their position. The militia had fought hard, but they'd underestimated her squad's resolve. She crouched beside one of the mounted guns, inspecting it briefly, then shook her head. They couldn't carry it, and they didn't need it, they were moving too fast for heavy weapons now. The clearing was less than 100 meters away, and the sound of distant rotors confirmed their extraction bird was inbound. Relief washed over her briefly, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the fight wasn't over. The enemy would throw everything they had at stopping that chopper from lifting off. She signaled the team forward, and they advanced at a dead sprint, boots splashing through puddles, rifles raised. The trees opened up into a small clearing, muddy and littered with broken branches from the wind whipped up by the approaching helicopter. Its lights cut through the rain like beacons, and the sight of it sent a surge of adrenaline through her veins. They were close. Suddenly, gunfire erupted from the tree line opposite them. The militia had been waiting, hidden in the foliage, their rifles spitting death. She dove to the ground, returning fire instantly, her team spreading out and taking cover behind fallen logs and boulders. The helicopter hovered just above the clearing, its side gunner unleashing a torrent of suppressive fire that shredded the trees, but the militia was relentless, pouring rounds into the open space. She crawled forward, using every bit of cover she could, her rifle picking off enemies one by one. Keller had already taken a position behind a rock, his shots methodical, precise, cutting down anyone who dared to move. Ortiz was laying down grenades, explosions rocking the tree line and scattering the attackers. Briggs, bellowing like a man possessed, charged forward, his shotgun thundering as he blasted through their flank, forcing them to scatter. She followed, her movements fluid, her weapon an extension of her will. The air was thick with smoke and rain, bullets snapping past her head, mud splashing up with every step. The gunner on the helicopter shifted fire, mowing down a wave of enemies trying to push into the clearing. The tide was turning, but they needed to get aboard fast. "Go!" she shouted over the roar of gunfire and rotor blades. Keller covered them, his sniper rifle cracking with deadly rhythm, while Ortiz and Briggs sprinted toward the chopper. She provided cover fire, her rifle a constant stream of controlled bursts. Ortiz leaped aboard first, spinning to provide suppressive fire from the open door. Briggs was next, hauling himself up with a grunt, his shotgun blasting one last time before he slung it over his shoulder. Keller made his move, sprinting low and fast, sliding into the helicopter as rounds tore through the clearing behind him. She was the last, sprinting across the mud, her boots slipping as bullets tore into the ground around her. She dove, catching the extended hand of the crew chief, who hauled her aboard as the helicopter began to lift. The clearing disappeared beneath them, muzzle flashes still erupting from the jungle as the enemy fired desperately at the ascending bird. She slammed a fresh magazine into her rifle and returned fire from the open door, watching figures scatter below as tracer rounds from the chopper's gunner chewed through the trees. The roar of the rotors drowned everything else out, and for the first time in hours, she felt a flicker of hope. The helicopter climbed higher, buffeted by strong winds and the turbulence of the storm, the roar of its rotors deafening even through her headset. She crouched in the doorway, scanning the jungle below through the rain-streaked night vision goggles, her rifle resting on her knee, ready for any sign of pursuit. The jungle canopy stretched endlessly beneath them, dark and hostile, the muzzle flashes now fading into scattered sparks in the distance. She took a deep breath, her muscles aching from hours of relentless combat, but her mind refused to relax. The militia wouldn't give up so easily, not after the losses they'd suffered tonight. She glanced at Keller, who was reloading with calm precision, his sniper rifle resting against his leg, and at Ortiz, who was already patching up a shallow graze on his arm while keeping his weapon close. Briggs sat hunched, his breathing heavy, sweat and rain dripping off him, the shotgun across his lap like a trusted companion. They were alive, but barely holding together. The pilot's voice crackled through the comms, strained but steady, "We're not out of this yet." Radars lit up. "Got 2 bogies inbound, fast movers." Her gut clenched at the words, and she leaned forward to peer through the windshield. The storm clouds were thick, but through the gaps, she could see faint lights in the distance, growing brighter. Enemy aircraft. The pilot banked hard, the helicopter tilting sharply as he tried to weave through the dense cloud cover, using the storm as a shield. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the rain-slick canopy below for an instant, and in that flash, she saw the faint silhouette of one of the pursuing aircraft slicing through the clouds like a predator. The militia wasn't playing anymore, they'd scrambled fighters to intercept them. "Strap in," she barked, gripping the door frame as the helicopter pitched violently. Keller secured his sniper rifle and moved to assist the gunner, his calm demeanor unwavering even as the situation grew dire. Ortiz quickly secured their gear, making sure nothing would be thrown loose in the chaos. Briggs muttered a curse, bracing himself against the cabin wall as the helicopter dove sharply to avoid incoming fire. A stream of tracer rounds zipped past them, glowing like fireflies in the night, and the pilot yanked the controls, sending them into a stomach-churning roll. She gritted her teeth and held on, adrenaline coursing through her veins. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The first missile streaked past them, narrowly missing and detonating in the distance with a blinding flash. The shockwave rattled the helicopter, and the gunner returned fire, spraying the approaching aircraft with heavy-caliber rounds. The militia jet pulled up sharply, disappearing into the clouds, but she knew it would circle back. "Countermeasures armed," the pilot yelled, flipping switches as alarms blared in the cockpit. The second jet emerged from the storm on their left, firing a burst of machine gun fire that tore through the air just feet from their tail. She shouldered her rifle and took aim, squeezing off a burst, though she knew it was futile against a moving aircraft at that range. The helicopter banked hard again, diving low, skimming just above the jungle canopy. The rotor blades sliced through branches, sending leaves flying as they used the dense cover to mask their heat signature. Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating the rain-soaked faces of her team, their eyes hardened, jaws clenched, every one of them fully aware of how close they were to death. Ortiz moved to the other door, rifle ready, scanning the skies for movement. Keller calmly worked with the gunner, feeding ammo belts into the side-mounted weapon, his steady hands belying the chaos outside. Briggs leaned forward, his shotgun ready. Though there was little he could do against an airborne enemy, still, the sight of him prepared to fight against anything was grounding in its own way. She focused on the second jet's trajectory, tracking its approach through the night vision goggles. The aircraft made another pass, this time firing a missile. The pilot yanked hard on the controls, and flares deployed from the helicopter, streaking brightly through the sky. The missile veered, exploding harmlessly behind them. The explosion shook the air, and she felt the heat on her face even from this distance. "We've got 5 minutes to safe airspace," the pilot shouted. 5 minutes felt like an eternity when death could rain from the sky at any second. The jet swooped again, firing its guns in a desperate attempt to force them down. Keller's calm voice cut through the chaos as he directed the gunner's fire, and together they sent a storm of bullets back, forcing the jet to break off. She could feel the shift in momentum, the militia wasn't expecting this level of resistance. The pilot dove again, hugging the terrain, weaving between ridges and valleys with skill born of experience. Every maneuver was a gamble, but it kept them alive. She kept her rifle ready, scanning constantly, her finger tight on the trigger. The rain blurred everything, but her mind cut through the chaos, analyzing every sound, every flash of light. The first jet came back, sweeping low, but this time the gunner was ready, unloading a wall of fire that forced the plane to veer away. The helicopter jolted violently, a warning alarm blaring as shrapnel from a near miss ripped through the tail section. Ortiz moved instantly, checking the damage, his face grim. "We're leaking hydraulic fluid," he reported over comms, his voice steady despite the severity. The pilot cursed but kept flying, pushing the chopper to its limits. Minutes crawled by, each second a lifetime. The jungle below thinned, giving way to rocky terrain as they neared the border of friendly airspace. The militia jets made one final pass, firing everything they had, but the helicopter dove hard, deploying another round of countermeasures. Explosions lit up the sky behind them like fireworks, the shockwaves rocking the bird violently. The gunner roared over the comms, emptying the last belt of ammunition into the darkness, and one of the jets peeled off, trailing smoke, disappearing into the storm. The other hesitated, then retreated, vanishing into the clouds. She exhaled slowly, her heart pounding, realizing that they'd won this round. The pilot's voice came through, calmer now, "We're in the clear. Safe airspace ahead." Relief rippled through the cabin, though no one let their guard down completely. Keller gave her a nod, his face unreadable, while Ortiz leaned back, closing his eyes briefly, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Briggs let out a low whistle, shaking his head. That was too damn close. She allowed herself a small smile, but her grip on her rifle didn't loosen. The jungle was far behind them now, but the weight of what they'd just survived clung to them like the rain-soaked gear they wore. She scanned the skies one last time, ensuring no more threats lingered, then finally sat back, resting against the cold metal of the cabin wall. The storm still raged outside, but inside the helicopter, there was a heavy, charged silence, the kind that only comes after dancing on the edge of death. The extraction wasn't over yet, they still had to make it to the base, and the militia wouldn't forget the damage this squad had inflicted tonight. But for now, they were alive, and that was victory enough. She closed her eyes briefly, letting herself breathe for the first time in hours, her mind already piecing together their next move. The mission wasn't just survival, it was war, and war never really ended. The helicopter sliced through the storm, its rotors chopping the air with a steady rhythm as they closed in on their destination. The pilot's voice was steady over the comms, but she could hear the tension beneath his words. 15 minutes to base. Stay sharp. She nodded silently, glancing at her squad. Keller was back on overwatch near the open door, his sniper rifle cradled and ready in case of any last-minute surprises. Ortiz was crouched by the damaged hydraulic system, his hands slick with grease and rainwater as he worked to stabilize it with a temporary fix, his expression focused and calm. Briggs leaned against the cabin wall, shotgun across his knees, his face pale but determined, eyes scanning the storm-dark sky through the narrow side window. She herself sat near the door, rifle at the ready, scanning the black void beyond the rain. The battle wasn't over yet. Even in safe airspace, the militia had resources and allies, and she wouldn't underestimate them. The adrenaline from the firefight and dogfight hadn't left her system, her muscles were coiled, her mind razor-sharp. The base finally appeared as a cluster of glowing lights in the distance, faint at first through the rain and mist, then growing brighter. Relief flickered across her face, but she didn't relax. The helicopter descended lower, skimming above treetops and cliffs to stay out of radar range. Lightning illuminated the terrain in brief flashes, and she could see the valley below, a winding river reflecting shards of light like broken glass. It should have been beautiful, but all she saw were potential ambush sites, places where missiles or heavy guns could be waiting. She couldn't shake the sense that they weren't done yet. She motioned Keller to keep scanning, and he gave a silent nod, adjusting his scope. Ortiz finished patching the hydraulic line and moved back to his seat, his rifle ready, his face drawn but steady. Briggs muttered under his breath, double-checking his ammo. She rested her rifle on her knee, eyes fixed on the horizon, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. The first shot came from the ground below, a streak of tracer fire that tore upward, barely missing the helicopter's tail. The pilot banked hard as alarms blared, his voice sharp. Ground fire, 2 o'clock. She was already at the door, shouldering her rifle, scanning the terrain. Muzzle flashes erupted from the jungle, dozens of them, lighting up the darkness like fireflies. The militia had set up an ambush just shy of safe airspace, knowing this was their only chance to take them down. She fired in controlled bursts, Keller adding his precise shots, while the gunner unleashed a torrent of lead into the tree line. The helicopter shook violently as more rounds struck the fuselage, sparks flying. The pilot cursed, pulling up sharply as flares shot out, but the rain and mist made it difficult to spot enemy positions. Ortiz grabbed a grenade launcher and fired, explosions rocking the jungle below, clearing some of the firing points. Briggs leaned out the other door, his shotgun roaring, each blast echoing through the storm. "Hold steady," she shouted over the roar of gunfire and rotor blades, her eyes scanning for the source of the heaviest fire. There, a mounted heavy gun on a ridge, its operator firing relentlessly. She aimed carefully, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. The man dropped, and the gun fell silent, buying them precious seconds. The helicopter surged forward, weaving through the storm, but the ground fire didn't stop. More muzzle flashes lit up the valley, bullets tearing through leaves and striking the fuselage with a metallic Clang. She ducked instinctively, returning fire, her rifle spitting controlled bursts that cut down shapes in the darkness. Keller's calm voice called out targets, his shots deadly and precise, while Ortiz switched to suppressive fire with a light machine gun, the weapon rattling violently in his hands. Briggs' shotgun thundered again, sending a spray of shells into the darkness, and the gunner swept the tree line with devastating accuracy. The ambush faltered as they cut through the enemy positions, the militia overwhelmed by the sheer firepower raining down on them from above. The helicopter climbed higher, breaking through a layer of mist, and for a moment, the chaos below faded. She breathed hard, scanning the terrain one last time, but the gunfire had stopped. The valley receded into darkness, and ahead lay the faint glow of the base's landing zone. Clear for final approach, the pilot said, his voice finally steady again. She exhaled slowly, lowering her rifle, though her grip didn't loosen. Keller gave her a tight nod, and Ortiz leaned back, his face pale but relieved. Briggs let out a grunt, shaking his head. That was a hell of a welcome party, he muttered. She allowed herself a faint smile. They'd been hunted all night, ambushed at every turn, but they'd made it. The base was in sight. The helicopter touched down on the landing pad with a jolt, its damaged hydraulics groaning in protest. Soldiers swarmed the bird instantly, weapons at the ready, scanning the perimeter as medics and mechanics rushed forward. She jumped out first, rifle raised, scanning the area with practiced precision, her body still thrumming with adrenaline. Keller followed, his sniper rifle slung but ready, eyes sharp as ever. Ortiz and Briggs disembarked next, both weary but alert, weapons in hand. The ground crew moved fast, ushering them toward cover while inspecting the battered helicopter. She kept scanning, every instinct still screaming for caution, but nothing moved beyond the organized chaos of the base. The storm above had begun to break, the rain softening to a drizzle, and the glow of the floodlights cast long shadows on the tarmac. They were finally safe, but the weight of the night's battle settled heavily on her shoulders. She looked back at the helicopter, its fuselage riddled with bullet holes, smoke curling faintly from the tail. The pilot climbed out, exhausted but alive, and gave her a weary salute. She returned it silently, then turned to her squad. They were filthy, soaked, and bleeding from minor wounds, but they were alive, every one of them. Keller leaned against a crate, reloading his rifle out of habit, while Ortiz finally allowed himself to sit, running a hand through his rain-slicked hair. Briggs sat heavily on the ground, shotgun across his lap, staring at the sky with a look of disbelief. She crouched down beside them, her rifle resting across her knees, and for the first time since the mission began, she allowed herself to exhale fully. The mission had been to extract intel and survive, and they'd done both, but the cost was etched into every bruise, every scar, every weary expression. The militia would regroup, and the war was far from over, but tonight they dealt a crippling blow. She glanced at Ortiz, who handed her a small waterproof case taken from the compound. Inside was the intel that had sparked this operation: enemy supply routes, names of high-ranking officers, locations of hidden bases. The information would save lives, maybe even turn the tide of the conflict. That was why they'd fought so hard, why they'd risked everything. She closed the case and stood, looking out at the jungle beyond the base walls, now a distant, dark silhouette against the breaking storm. Her body ached, her mind was exhausted, but she felt something rare, a deep, quiet pride. They'd gone through hell together, and they'd come out alive. She holstered her rifle and turned back to her team. "Good work," she said simply. No speeches, no celebration. Just those two words. They nodded silently, their bond stronger than any words could express. As the storm finally began to clear and the first faint light of dawn touched the horizon, she knew this night would never leave them. They weren't just survivors, they were predators who'd refused to be hunted. And as long as they breathed, they would keep fighting. The end.